It can't be fixed. And here's why. The only thing that can fix it, Jeff, is lower interest rates. That's it. Because what happens is the values, when rates got down to basically zero, it created a bubble. And people bought at that price. It's really that simple. And so the prices were significantly higher 2 years ago. And I would say that they're 20 to 30% less, maybe even 40 in some cases. And it depends on the asset class. But so if you're a long-term holder and you're cash flowing, it doesn't really even matter. It's almost like buying a home and you're still making the payment and the value went down. It's not a big deal if you don't have to sell. It really isn't. And the issue becomes if the loan or the debt matures, so mostly on the loan side. So those commercial banks that lent, and mostly these are small and regional banks that lend on this money, they are exposed significantly depending on what they've loaned into. So if they've loaned into the office building market, that's getting clobbered because of the work from home and, the vacancies. I mean, I was talking to a guy this weekend. He had an office building in San Francisco and one in Phoenix, and his rent was $1 million a year. And he wasn't even going there because his employees now all work from home. So he's just waiting for those leases to burn off. And so you're starting to see these leases burn off, and there's a lot of folks that they've changed the way they do business, and they're not going to go back into these office buildings. What that does is it lowers the occupancy, of course, and lower occupancy means lower revenue, and so now they're going to struggle paying just your normal expenses, which are taxes, insurance, utilities, and all that, in addition to the mortgage. So, there's a certain break even on these buildings, and they're probably in the 50 to 70% depending. Now that would be debt plus expenses, and once you start to get your revenue below that, you're in default. And so that's
Well, Ken,
coming.
I think that's where I think a lot of the question is, because I think you've raised this issue before, shadow vacancy, which is, as you were just saying, there's office buildings that have leases, but nobody's there, and everybody knows as soon as the lease is up, there's no way to replace it. There's no demand of space, and then the companies who have these leases, they're just going to walk away from. They're not going to re-up because they don't need them. So I get the process. Okay, so then the leases, they come up, nobody leases them. So what happens then if you're a building owner, your leases go down, your cash flow goes down, and at some point, don't you have to start working with the bank, or do you just walk away from the property and say, I'm done, I can't make this work? What is the next kind of steps here?
Yeah, the answer is yes. The very first thing that will happen is the bank will contact the owner, and they'll say, okay, because don't forget, there's certain reporting that we have to do, to our banks, and the banks know all about my financials, and they're constantly looking at our projects, and because that's what the banks are supposed to do. So banks know exactly, and so you get put on a watch list, let's say, and they're like, okay, they're watching your cash reserves go down, they're watching your occupancy go down, and also, let's don't forget, in addition to the debt problem and the occupancy problem, you've got expenses have gone up a lot. So, we're getting clobbered on insurance. We're getting clobbered on property taxes. We're getting clobbered on expenses. And most people don't care. But at the end of the day, it just adds to the problem. And so, so when rates go up, so imagine I'll just give you a great example. I have 2 projects under construction. Now, I started these 3 years ago. It takes a long time to build these bigger projects. Our rates at the time were somewhere in the 4 to 5% at the time. Right now, they're in the 8 to 9% because they're floating rate. And so as rates go up, the monthly cost or the annual debt cost on the exact same loan, go up a lot. And so I was playing golf with a friend of mine 2 weeks ago, and he said that on one deal that he has, his debt costs went from $250,000 a month to over 500 per month. And you just can't make that up anywhere. Your rents aren't going up that much, and you can't cut expenses that much. So the debt costs have made it so hard for people to be able to hold these kinds of assets. And so there's no solution for the banks, only lowered interest rates.
Yeah, and then, well, I think the real issue is how do we know where all of these faults, like, because we have no information, we have no public information. That's why I think the New York Community Bank Corp news was such a shock, because that was one of the first ones that said, yeah, we all know there's a problem, but let's put some numbers on it. So let me ask you that, Ken. Do you have a sense of where? Not, I mean, you said we're in maybe the second inning here, but do you have a sense of how widespread these difficulties are? Is it just the office towers? Is it just, San Francisco and New York? Or are we seeing things in like some core markets that maybe you wouldn't necessarily associate with big real estate? How widespread is this issue of really cash flow meeting that debt threshold and getting us closer to the point where business or building owners or property owners just say it's just not worth the hassle anymore? I think, as you said, the important point is in everything, liquidations, forced selling. That's where the real, forgive me, the shit hits the fan, is when everybody's forced to sell. And I think we're trying to figure out where that is. So, I mean, in your sense, how widespread is the issue?
It's widespread, but it's also it's solvable in so many ways. So I think if you drew a line in the sand from let's say if anything got bought in, let's say, the last 2 years, for sure, 2.5 to 3 years, anything, you had higher values, you had higher loans, and you had low interest rates. Okay, so if you just put everything in that category, and that could be a lot of small regional banks. Believe it or not, some of the big boys, some of the big banks, are actually not very much exposed in a lot of these. And I think a lot of people, when they think of where the problem is, the office buildings are easy to point at, obviously. But it's everywhere. It's anything that was new construction, like what I just explained. That increase on the construction loan affects cash flow. So anything that's newly being built, that's all in some form of distress. You've got you have a lot of regional centers, as far as like regional malls are actually dying on the vine. And so, as those stores, start to go away, I'm talking about big stores, like Kmart, Macy's, Sears, JCPenney's. Those are gone. A lot of people grew up with those. Those are gone. And so when those are gone, the smaller stores in those areas also die on the vine. Now, that's because of, call it the Amazon effect, or, whatever it might be, where, people order stuff and come straight to the door. So there's just a whole bunch of things going on at once. And I think that, it's regional largely. And it depends a lot on what the banks did on those particular asset classes.